Hi guys, welcome back. This is Professor Hank, and in this video we're going to go through another problem from the textbook, right? But with this problem we're going to go through and see an example of modular programming, okay? So we're going to use functions to implement the problem, or to the solution of the problem, I should say, and we're going to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, okay? So we're going to follow our process, which is step 1, understand the problem. Step 2, plan a solution. Step 3, implement that plan, write the code. So we'll take a look at what the problem is, and then we'll come up with a plan to solve that problem using functions. Okay, and we're going to utilize hierarchy charts as a tool here to help us to organize our functions, right? To help us to know which functions are going to be calling which functions and in what order. Okay, and then we'll finish up by implementing the plan, writing the solution, writing the code for it. All right, so on to part 1 of our 3-step process, understanding the problem. Okay, so for this problem, what we need to do is we need to write a program that's going to calculate the average of a group of test scores, right? So we're going to want to drop the lowest score in that group. Okay, and so it should use the following functions, right? So there's 4 functions explicitly named here. These functions would need to be written, right, with these names. So main, that function is going to call the following functions, and main implements the mainline logic for the program. Get score, that function asks the user for a test score, validates it, and returns it. That function should be called by main once for each of the 5 scores to be entered. So it looks like this program is going to ask for 5 scores, right? And so we're going to call this function 5 times, and main's going to do the calling. Calc average. Now calc average is going to calculate and display the average of the 4 highest scores. The function should be called just once by main and should be passed the 5 scores. Okay, so that tells me that thing's going to need 5 parameters, so it can be passed 5 arguments, right? Each one of those arguments, their values are going to be attained by the get score function, right? So it's going to return nothing because it's displaying, the average. It doesn't say anything about returning here. And let's see here. It's going to display the average of the 4 highest scores, but it's going to be past the 5 scores. That's interesting. So that leads us to the next function, 5 lowest. That should find and return the lowest of the 5 scores passed to it. It should be called by calc average, which uses the function to determine which of the 5 scores to drop. Okay, now that's interesting, right? So find lowest is given 5 scores and then has to figure out which one is the lowest. Okay, so we're going to need to do some thinking with that to figure that out. And then finally, there's some input validation here. Do not accept test scores lower than 0 or higher than 100. Okay, so since the calc average function, or excuse me, the get score function is required to ask the user for a test score, then the input validation should obviously occur there. Now let's add some algorithms for our functions, right? So main, it's pretty self-evident from the hierarchy chart itself what it's going to be doing. It's simply going to exist to call these other functions, right? So I'm not going to write a completely separate algorithm for main. However, what about get score, right? What about the get score function? Okay, the get score function, its algorithm, what does it need to do? Well, it needs to ask the user for a test score, validate it, and return it, right? So what we need to do is we have to ask the user for a score, right? Now, remember the validation part. Do not accept test scores lower than 0 or higher than 100. So we're going to use a loop for that. While score is less than 0 or greater than 100, then we're going to do some stuff. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we'll go ahead and print an error message to let them know what went wrong. Okay, and then we'll ask them for the score again. Okay, Oops, again. Now, once we've gotten through past that loop, right, once they've actually given us a score that works, then we'll go ahead and have that function return the score. Okay. All right, so what about calc average? What about the algorithm for that? Okay, well, the calc average algorithm is going to be pretty straightforward. What's it got to do? Right, well, it's going to take the 5 arguments, that's right, and then what's it going to do? It's going to subtract the smallest, right? Remember, it's going to use the find lowest function to figure out what that smallest is. So subtract the smallest, and then divide, well, or I should say average, right? Then it should average the 4 remaining. I can't spell, sorry. Okay, and then it should display that. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to do there. Okay, now what about find lowest? Okay, find lowest. Okay, well, there's a couple different ways we could do this. Here's the algorithm I'm going to use, though, right? Now remember, this thing takes 5 numbers as arguments, right? There's 5 scores that are going in. Okay, so I'll refer to those scores as A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll start off, we'll assume A is the lowest. Okay. And then we'll just ask a series of questions. Well, if B is less than A, then B is the lowest. Right? Well, let's keep going. What if C is less than the lowest? Right? Well, then C is the lowest. Okay? And then what if D is less than the lowest? Well, then D is. And then finally, if E is less than the lowest, then E is the lowest. Right? And then once we get through all of that, then we'll go ahead and we'll return the lowest. Okay? So that's our plan. Okay, so here's a hierarchy chart outlining the functions we need, who's calling them, and what and in which orders. Here's our algorithm for get score. Here's our algorithm for calc average, and here's our algorithm for find lowest. So now that we know how this is all going to work, let's go ahead and write the code for it. Alright, hello idle, my old friend. Here we go again. So right hand side I got the text editor for idle, and on the left hand side I got the Python shell already opened up. So let's get started, right? So I know that I'm going to have that main function, okay? So I got main, and it's going to be calling all the other functions, right? Now main itself needs to be called, okay? And this is the starting point for the program, basically, right? Because as soon as main gets called, then the main function, which contains all the function calls, right? All that mainline logic starts executing, okay? So we're going to be filling out main here as we get going. So we had to have a function called getScore, right? Now remember our algorithm for this. We had to start off by asking the user for a score, right? Enter a score. And we had to do some input validation. We had to say, well, so long as that score is less than 0 or that score is greater than 100, right? Because 0 through 100 is fine, right? If that number is from 0 through 100, then both those test expressions right here are going to become false, and so this entire thing will be false, and so we'll bust out this validation loop, right? This is going to be our input validation loop. But so long as the score is less than 0 or greater than 100, and notice I said or, not and, right? It's logically impossible for a score to be both less than 0 and greater than 100. It can't happen. So we got to use or here. We're checking for a number that comes outside of a range, not within a range. So what do I have to do? I have to print an error message, right? Error, invalid score. Try again. You know, whatever. Some kind of error message to let them know what they did wrong. And then I've got to get the next score, get the score from again, right? Now, once that's done, I need to return that score, okay? Now, at this point, rather than continue on writing all the other functions, I'm just going to test get score on its own to make sure that it works correctly, right? And that's what you want to do when you're doing modular programming. When you're writing functions in programs that use functions, you want to write and test each one at a time, so that way, you know, once you've got it working, you know that if anything explodes later on, you know, as you're adding new code, you know it wasn't the previous functions you already wrote that caused the problem, because you already wrote them and tested them, okay? All right, so let's just go ahead and try this. So we'll say A equals get score, right? And then we'll just print A. Now I'm not going to leave print A in there, you know, for my solution. It's just temporarily here, just so I can test to make sure that it works. Okay, so enter a score. So how about 87? And I see 87. Okay, 87 is valid input, should be just fine, right? What about negative 33? Well, that should get trapped in my validation loop. And it is. What about negative 27? Yep. Negative 99. Yep. How about something greater than 100? 127. Yep. So it looks like, I'll go ahead and finish off with something that's valid, 56. Right? So it looks like my get score function is working. Okay. So my main function has to call get score 5 times. So I'll go ahead and plug that in at this point, right? So, and I'll need 5 different variables for that. Haven't covered lists yet, right? So we'll do it this way. We'll call it score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So I don't need, once I add these extra 4 lines, I don't need to test this again, because I already know that get score works. Get score is always going to work. I already tested it. I can forget about that, having to test it ever again. I know it works. I completed it, right? And tested it. All right, so the next thing I needed to do was calc average. But here's the thing. Calc average depends on find lowest, right? So I can't really write calc average until find lowest is working. So I'm going to write find lowest next. Now, find lowest, remember, had to take the 5 scores as an argument, right? Which I called all uppercase A, B, C, D, any when we were going through the plan for the algorithm. But I'll just use lowercase here, because uppercase usually implies it's a constant. You know, this doesn't. I don't need to imply that here. Okay, so what was my algorithm? Start off by assuming that the lowest score was the first score, right? Was A. Okay, and then I was just going to ask a series of questions. Well, if A is less than, or excuse me, if B is less than the lowest, right? Let's just go to the next score, right? So we'll assume A is the lowest, then we'll go up to B and say, well, are you smaller than what the lowest is we found so far? Well, if so, well, congratulations. You're the new lowest, right? And then after that, we'll go and we'll ask C, well, are you smaller than what's the lowest. Right now, notice it's not an elif, right? That'd be a logic error, because as soon as one of these tests evaluated to true, you would no longer be testing any of the other scores, right? So this is actually going to be a series of ifs. So if C is less than the lowest, right, then we'll go ahead and say the lowest is C, right? And we'll do that for D and E also. Okay, so I'll just copy and paste. Right. And one more there. Okay. And then once I'm finished with that, then the variable lowest will have the lowest score assigned to it. And so then I can return the lowest. Okay. So now that I have that ready to go, let's go ahead and test it. Right. So I'll just say test score. Right. And well, you know what? Actually, here's what I'll do. I'll just go ahead and call this thing. Even though main's not supposed to call it, I'll just do it right now for testing purposes, right? We'll fix it here in a second. Score 1, score 2, score 3, score 4, score 5, okay? And then we'll go ahead and assign what find lowest returns to a variable called lowest, and then we'll just print that out, just for testing purposes, right? This is just temporary, okay? So let's go ahead and run it. So 88, 77, 99, 43, 89, or 89, yeah, okay. So what should I see on the screen? If find lowest does its job, I should see 43 on the screen, right? Ta-da! Right, so let me try a different combination of numbers, right? You don't want to just go with the first set of numbers. You want to try different orders, right? Because, you know, sometimes bugs can creep through if you just, you know, did 99, 80, you know, in descending order or ascending order in certain combinations. So you want to try multiple combinations to raise, and this one worked, to raise your overall confidence level that your code's working, right? Maybe ascending order, maybe descending order, you know, maybe some other random order stuff in the middle, you know, put the smallest number in the middle, put it, you know, on the ends, whatever. Okay, so 55, that's correct also. And then we'll do one more. 66, 77, 99, 66, 77, right? 77. So 66, well, actually, I have it in 2 different places, but that's okay. Hand trace through the code to see why that's okay. It's still going to tell me 66. Okay, and one more time, I want to put the lowest number in the middle here. Kind of screwed the pooch on that one. 45, 78, 97, right? So that should show me 45. Yeah, I mean, so this looks pretty rock solid. Okay, so now my find lowest function works. Now remember, this was just temporary testing code. So let's get that out of here. Because calc average is supposed to call find lowest. So now that I have find lowest, right, let's go ahead and call calc average. Calc average depends on find lowest. And just to show you, I'm going to be using, so there's no confusion between variable names, I'm going to use some different variable names here just so they're unique. You'll see why here in just a second. Let's see here. So I'll say S1 for score 1, S2 for score 2, S3, S4, S5, etc. Okay. Let's see. So we'll do that. Now, remember what this thing has to do. It has to take the smallest score, get rid of the smallest score. Okay. Well, how's it going to do that? Well, if you add everything up, right? Let's say that I take all the scores, add them all together, and then I subtract the smallest one. What am I going to have left? I'm going to have a sum of the biggest scores, right? So that's what I'm going to do here. So we'll do something like this. Equals S1 plus S2 plus S3 plus S4 plus S5, right? Now, what I need to do is I need to take away the smallest, or the lowest score. Now, isn't it nice that I have this function called find lowest that does just that, right? And I'm going to have calc average just pass its parameters as arguments to find lowest. Okay, so you can pass parameters as arguments, no problem. Okay, right. So find lowest will then figure out what the smallest of those 5 is, and then subtract that from our total. Add up all the numbers, subtract the smallest number, and what you have left is the sum of the 4 biggest numbers. Isn't that right? Okay, so then from there we'll go ahead and we'll figure out our average. Now the average is going to be the total divided by 4, right? Because it's the 4 biggest numbers, not divided by 5. Right? I subtracted the lowest. And then I need to display that average. Okay, so we'll go ahead and print the average is, and then average. Okay. All right, so let's go back to main, and to finish this off, all we have to do is call calc average. Okay, and we're going to pass it the 5 scores. Oops. Score 4, score 5. There we go. That's what I wanted. And that should do it for my main. Okay, that should do it. So here's my get score function, my find lowest, and my calc average. Okay, so let's go ahead and test it. Right. So run it. So enter a score. So what we'll do is I'll just enter 80, 80, 70, 80, 80. Now when I hit enter, the average should be 80, right? Because 70 gets dropped. And so then 80 times 4 is 320, divided by 4 is 80. So my average should be 80, and it is. Okay, so let's try another set of numbers. How about 75, 60, 75, 80, 80. Right? So the average here is 77.5. Does that make sense? Well, if you take 80 plus 80, that's 160, plus 75 plus 75, that's 150, so that's 310. 310 divided by 4, well, 75 times 4 is 350, right? And then you have to add the extra 30 to get up to the original total that we started off with. So yeah, that's the average, 77.5. Feel free to try it on your calculator if you had a hard time following my reasoning there. All right. So yeah, so it looks like we're done with this, right? So we got our functions. We understood what the problem was, right? We took a modular approach, and that just meant we built the thing using functions. And we came up with a plan. You know, we used a hierarchy chart to help us arrange our functions in the right orders in which they needed to be called, and we had to figure out who was calling who. We had a nice graphic of that, nice chart showing us that. And then we came up with algorithms for each one of the functions. Okay, so that's going to bring this video to a close. If you felt that the video was useful, please consider giving the video a thumbs up. And if you thought that the video sucked, well, then you've got that thumbs down button as an option as well. If you'd like to see more videos, if you're interested in more content from the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And as usual, if you're a student of mine and you have further questions, feel free to drop me an email or to stop by my office hours. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.